This morning we continue our trip through the beginning part of Nehemiah as we continue talking about the importance of having a vision within our lives, whether that vision deals with certain aspects of our lives, maybe the relationship that we have with our spouses, the children, what the family should look like. Maybe it's a vision of the way that our employership should be, the role on the job, or whether it has to do with the way that things look like right here with this church, which is something we'll talk about later. But this morning we're going to continue to look at Nehemiah, seeing what happens when Nehemiah finally makes his way back to Jerusalem for the very first time. Good morning. Good to be here this morning, isn't it? Appreciate the songs that we have been singing together. Appreciate the song that was just led. I think that's 2 weeks in a row. Kelly has led that one for us right before the sermon. And that's actually because I asked very specifically for that song, as it really fits the theme. And I appreciated the words that Kelly said beforehand, "Let us rise up and build." That has something to do with what we're talking about this morning. It's good to sing these songs together, to proclaim the Lord's death together, to be here together. There's awfully a lot of folks who just aren't feeling very well. Hopefully, you're able to join with us online, and for all of you who are with us online, we appreciate you joining in with us. And for everybody who is here together, it's good to be here. I appreciate you. I appreciate this church. And I appreciate the opportunity that you give to me to open up the Word of God with you. We're in the middle of a series, and so everything builds upon itself as we continue through the series, as we are working our way through the beginning part of Nehemiah. And really, remember, it all begins with the idea of having a vision, a clear mental picture of what could be, fueled by the conviction that it should be. That is, you're able to look around and say, though things aren't necessarily terrible, they could be better. And when you say they could be better, then that shifts to a they should be better. What could be, what should be, must be, if I am to be who I'm created to be. It creates a moral imperative that we understand we need to be a part of this solution. And hopefully when it comes to vision, we're able to see what could be and what should be. And so we're following Nehemiah as Nehemiah is dealing with this very idea of seeing a vision. Remember in Nehemiah chapter 1, we saw the birth of this vision when he heard back from his brothers what had been going on in Jerusalem. He expected things to be great, just like God had promised in Deuteronomy chapter 30. Instead, it's the exact opposite. The walls are still rubble. The city and the God of that city are shamed. And so he feels as if he needs to do something, and the very first thing that he does when a vision begins to form, he prays. The very first part of having a vision, first and foremost, is a prayer to God concerning this, and he ends it by saying, give me success before this man, and that's when he lets us know that he's the cupbearer to the king. So we get to the beginning of chapter 2, when you see the maturing of this vision, and you have a time span of around 4 months or so, in which he is just waiting for the opportunity to speak with the king. The opportunity comes up, and when it does, he's asked direct questions, and he has the answers for them. Not only that, he has more information to give, because this was not idle time. After he prayed about his vision, he then spent his time in planning for the moment that he would have the opportunity to see this vision realized. So that when the moment came, he told the king exactly how long he'd be gone. And he said, I need a letter for this so I can go across the provinces and I can give them a letter that allows me safe passage. And he says, and I need a letter for this to the Asaph guy who was in charge of the lumber for the empire, saying, I need lumber for this project, and this project. He had planned everything out so that once the moment was there, he had everything. When God was ready to move forward, he wasn't holding God back. And this brings us then, because we realize, I put Nehemiah chapter 2 because that's just the way I remember it. We didn't cover all of Nehemiah chapter 2 last week. I think we all realize we kind of broke about midway through. And so the next part of this is to finish looking at Nehemiah chapter 2 into chapter 3. So Nehemiah chapter 2, starting in verse 9, now we are transitioning away from Nehemiah in Susa, the capital, there with the king. Now he is making his way back to Jerusalem. In Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 9, I came to the governors of the province beyond the river, and I gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. Now there's not much to say about these couple verses, except notice how fortuitous it was that Nehemiah planned before acting. Because one of the things he very specifically asked the king for was letters to give me safe passage to get through once I go to the provinces beyond the river. And as he's going through them, he is running into leaders who don't want him to succeed. He runs into these guys who are like, whoa, hold on. I'm not sure that I want someone to actually care about Jerusalem. Nehemiah was accurate. There are people who are not interested in Israel rising to prominence once again. Remember, during this time when Israel has been basically non-existent, the city of Jerusalem lies in ruins. Nobody's there. Nobody cares about it. There are a lot of people who have enjoyed the lack of a power center there in Judah. They have filled that power void with themselves. Undoubtedly, they've enjoyed the balance of power as it is, and any new power that steps in to care about Jerusalem is going to mess up the balance that they've enjoyed. So they're greatly displeased that someone, especially someone who has the favor of the king, who has papers from the king, who was given an army to travel with from the king, that he would travel through and say, hey, by the way, I'm going to Jerusalem to check in on what's going there and to deal with the welfare of the people of Israel. Now, take notice of the names that are given. If you have studied Nehemiah before, these names should look familiar because they come up from time to time throughout the beginning part of the narrative that we're going to be looking at. Sanballat and Tobiah. Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite servant. Sanballat and Tobiah. These are going to be the thorns in Nehemiah's side from out of Israel, the pressures of problems that come from there. And here's how I kind of envision these guys when I think of them. They're kind of like, Scott Farkas and his Toady Grover Dill from A Christmas Story. They're the big bad guys that are just there to try to be bullies and, try to make things worse. But they can't actually do anything to Nehemiah here because of the papers that Nehemiah has. He was wise enough to get them. But these guys, as I said, are going to continue to crop up in the story as outsiders who are trying to bully and make fun of Nehemiah and the people of Israel. So we move on from here to verse 11. So I went to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me except the one on which I rode. And then I went out by night, and I didn't put this up here, but if you read this in the text, he starts talking about all of the gates and places that he went to that he inspected. He says, I went out at night, and I looked at this gate and checked this out. He says, and then I went out by night, and I did this, and then I went, and he basically goes through and at night inspects the city. Now, what's interesting here is how circumspect Nehemiah is. Let's first suggest, what could he have done? Maybe he could have come in with all the pomp and circumstance. He has a royal entourage that's there with him. He has letters from the king. He could go around the city making sure that everyone knows that he's kind of a big deal. And goes and just makes sure everybody sees, I am the king's representative here. I'm the guy with the power. He could have, and he had every right, by virtue of the authority given to him from the king, to just start throwing his weight around, letting everyone know who he was, the authority that he has. He could have rounded up all the people and simply lambasted them for the fact that the city was in the state that it was, and said, you've been living here for how long, and look at these walls. This is ridiculous. Why haven't you guys taken care of this? There's going to be punishment thrown out for everybody because you haven't done what you should have been doing. He could have done all of that. But instead, he comes into town and does nothing for 3 days. Now, I happen to believe when it says that he stayed there for 3 days and then I arose. I don't think the then is after 3 days, then he did. I think he's there for 3 days, and during the night, during those 3 days, he is inspecting the city in the night. It's not like he's there for 3 days, and then after 3 days, he's like, okay, I guess I'll get up and look at the city at nighttime. I think that's, in English, that's what it sounds like. But I think that's a translation type of a thing. I think it just simply means while he's there for 3 days, he's doing nothing during the day, but at night, he is checking out the city. He goes out, he looks at the walls, and why does he do it at night? Well, remember, nobody knows why he's there. Nobody knows what he's doing. Suddenly there's a guy who's walked in who has letters from the king, and he has a royal entourage with him, but all they know is he's just sitting around for 3 days. He's not tipping his hat. Now, he knows what God has put into his heart to do, but he's keeping that information close to the chest, really inside it, close. He doesn't want to be accompanied by anyone that he didn't want around him as he goes out. He wants to view it all for himself first. And so what he finds is, I think, a little less than hopeful. There are sections of the walls that have been torn down to such a degree he can't even get to where he wants to get because his mount just can't fit within all of that rubble. And I think we often think of him inspecting the walls in kind of this picture where you have the city of Jerusalem, and the city of Jerusalem is a pretty sprawling city, in ancient Jerusalem. I have a feeling, based on the information that's here and having read, what some other people have said, I think it's probably more than likely that what he is inspecting is this area. This would be the city of David and the addition in Solomon's time, the cities of David and Solomon. This would be down here, the city of David, kind of the original part. This is the extension up here. That's the temple. This includes the Temple Mount. And so this is probably the section that is being focused on. It's a section that includes the temple, includes the main gates, all of that kind of stuff. And this is the main part of the city. So as the people are returning from captivity, that's probably all that's necessary for them at this point to really try to work to reconstruct. So all I'm saying is that the building project is not one, I don't think, that encompasses all of these walls necessarily. But we're looking at the most important part of the earliest part of Jerusalem. If this is correct, then what he's focusing on is he's walking around the cities of David, the city of Solomon. He's going around and considering the fortress that once was. Now, if you happen to have read the bulletin article for today, it kind of featured in it Psalm 48. In Psalm 48, written probably around the time of Solomon or so, the temple is built. They reference the temple. Psalm 48 by the sons of Korah. This would have been the extent of Jerusalem at the time. And in the end of Psalm 48, the psalmist there invite people to walk around the city, to go about it, to look at its walls, look at the ramparts, look at the citadels, look how majestic and beautiful and glorious the walls of the city are during this time. And I believe that it is striking that here, around 500 years later, Nehemiah is doing exactly that very thing. He is, just as in Psalm 48, walking around the city, inspecting its walls, its citadels, its fortresses, the Temple Mount, everything. But there's a huge difference. In Psalm 48, Jerusalem was to be the envy of all the other nations. In Psalm 48, the kings came together, looked at it, quaked in fear, and ran away because they knew that there was no way they could stand up to the might and the power of the people of Israel and their God. In Psalm 48, everything was, look at us and how great we are. But the fact of the matter is, no one is going to be afraid of the walls in Nehemiah's time. In fact, the walls had been destroyed by one of those very kings, one of the enemies of God's people. What was once a grand city has been laid to ruins, and I wonder if Nehemiah thought about the great men of old who had taken a trip around these walls before, back when the walls represented just how amazing the God of Israel was to his people. But now that walk that Nehemiah takes is much different. And so you get to verses 17 and 18, and Jonathan read these verses for us just a few moments ago. And he comes out and he gives an address to the people. This is the address of a man who is going to create a necessary change in Jerusalem. Remember, he's been there 3 days. He's gone at night. He's inspected the walls, the gates, and all of that. He knows now what is before them. And he says in verse 17, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates are burned. He says, I'm not the only one who sees this, right? You understand just how bad this is. You understand how horrible it is that the gates are just a bunch of rubble, and how that looks bad on us and it looks bad on God. He says, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. And then he continues to tell them about how God had taken care of him, how he had prayed to God, and God had given him the success that he had prayed for, and that he'd gotten everything that he wanted to get from the king, and how the good hand of God had been upon him during all of this. He explains everything to the people. And then the coolest part of the section is not the words of Nehemiah, but the response of the people. In fact, their answer is a phrase that I'm assuming is in y'all's vocabulary already, because Kelly said it just a few moments ago. And it's one we're going to say probably even more, let us rise up and build. What a cool answer, isn't it? I mean, for a second, let's again think about what could have happened here. You have this guy who just comes in, and he's kind of suspicious to begin with. He comes, he seems to be someone from the king's court. He walks in, and he makes himself aloof for 3 days. He doesn't have anything to do with anybody. He's not talking to people. He's keeping to himself. And then he gathers up all the people, and he criticizes them and says, hey, you guys realize how bad this is, right? How could that have been taken by the people? Maybe they get mad and just simply question his authority. Maybe they say, who are you to come in here and try to criticize us? Who do you think that you are? You can just boss us around like that? They may have thought that. Maybe they could have responded with apathy. And they could have simply said to him, okay, you don't like the walls the way they are. We're fine with it. We're the ones that have been living here, buddy. We're okay with it the way that it is. You haven't even been here. You're from Susa, and you're coming in here trying to tell us that we need to make a change. We're just fine the way we are. Life works. We don't need walls to do what we need to do. They could have responded and just simply ignored him. Instead, they demonstrate that they have a willingness to join with him. They see what he sees, and it makes sense. They notice they should be doing what he says they should be doing. Perhaps they feel guilty knowing that he's right. They should have been working on these walls. Remember, it hasn't been very long since they'd been guilted into finishing the temple, and they realize that he is right. The walls need to be rebuilt. And the key really is this: they recognize this is a worthy cause. They see that what is before them is not good enough. Something could be better, and if it could be better, then it should be better. This is a good work. So they work to make it a reality. Folks, what they've done is they have bought in to Nehemiah's vision. They have joined with him. Nehemiah had a vision that said, this is what could be, therefore it should be. And he gave his vision to the people, and they looked around and they said, you know what, Nehemiah, you're right. This is what could be and what should be. And when you get everybody connected together with the same vision in their minds of what could be and what should be, then everyone together is going to strengthen their hands for the good work. This isn't Nehemiah stepping in and saying, hey, here's my vision, make it happen. This is Nehemiah stepping in and saying, here is my vision, what do you think? And the people respond, I say what your vision is now my vision. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. Now this brings us then, we're going to take just a little parenthetical note away from the story to talk about our buddies, Sanballat and Tobiah again this time. It adds in Geshem the Arab. But when they heard of it, it says they jeered at us, they despised us, and they said, what is this thing you're doing? Are you rebelling against the king? So I replied to them, the God of heaven will make us prosper. We, his servants, will rise and build, but you have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem. So we have our good buddies, Sanballat, Tobiah, show up again. You had this guy named Geshem. He's not really as memorable as the other two, and there's not a third guy in a Christmas story, so I'm not going to try to make him work in there with it, but they seem to make some kind of trips and some kind of emissaries, notes, something in some way. They're working amongst themselves, but word comes to Nehemiah. They believe Nehemiah must be in the wrong for what he's doing, that he's inciting a rebellion. And that might seem odd, because didn't Nehemiah already show them papers? Didn't he already say, I have the authority of the king? Why would they be saying that, hey, are you inciting a rebellion here? Well, remember what the papers were. The papers were for safe passage. The papers were not for safe passage so that he could rebuild Jerusalem necessarily. What they see is that he has come through with an army, and now that he's entrenching himself in Jerusalem, now he's trying to incite a rebellion. He's gone rogue. Whatever his mission was, he's gone off mission because he's trying to raise up the Israelites once again there in Judah. And they say, have you created a rebellion against the king? So now that he has revealed his plans to bring Jerusalem back, maybe they believe that's just beyond the scope of why he came. But Nehemiah responds, and he makes claims once again to the authority of a king. But it's not the king they're thinking of. He speaks of the king, the God of Israel. And he reminds them that even if they have enjoyed, perhaps ruling over the territory, their time of control has come to an end. They have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem. The people are rising up, and they are building. And the reign that these governors may have had over Jerusalem has come to an end. And this brings us then into Nehemiah chapter 3. And no, I'm not going to read through Nehemiah chapter 3. I know many of you, if you knew we were coming to this, you probably were looking forward to watching me struggle through all of the names that are in Nehemiah chapter 3, as it lists name after name after name after name that are hard to pronounce, and I'm not going to do that. But I think that we can at least get an idea of what's happening, because this chapter is interesting, if you like to read names. And it talks about how these people got to work, and it lists names of individuals who got to work. There are, though, a few things that I really want to point out, such as verse 10, next to them, Jediah, the son of Harimath, repaired opposite his house. Next to him, Hattush, the son of Habash. Hashabneah, see, there I am. That's why I'm not reading through chapter 10. Hashabneah repaired. You see that in verse 10. Where is Jediah, the son of Harimath, repairing? He's taking care of the walls opposite, or right there next to his house. Verses 22, 23, after him the priests, the men of the surrounding area repaired, and then after them Benjamin and Hashub repaired opposite their house. After them Azariah, the son of Maaseiah, son of Ananiah, repaired beside his own house. Are you kind of catching a theme that's running? How many times you see people who are repairing the walls at what spot? Right by their house. And then verses 28 through 30, you get more of the same. More of these who are repairing walls right by their house. Why? Why do that? Why does it matter where they repair the walls? Well, think about it. If an enemy's going to approach, and the enemy's going to walk around the walls, what are they looking for? They're looking for the weakest section. They're looking for that spot where they could say, well, I bet our siege weapons could get through here, or we could break through here, or this is the weakest part of the walls. If you live right by these walls, do you maybe have a little bit of a vested interest to make sure that section is pretty well built? I think that's what's going on. They're given the sections right by their houses. If you live by the wall, then you are responsible for the wall that is near your house, because you're going to give it extra attention, knowing that the safety of your family is dependent on your wall building. You would make sure it's done well. So here there are at least those who work by their house, and they are taking care of the walls to the best that it can be taken care of. Now, here are a few things that I think we can pull from what we have talked about. And some of this, the first couple things, really have to do with leadership. Nehemiah is giving us a picture of being a leader, having a vision, and coming in to a position where you're trying to change things. And I think it's important to note, Nehemiah doesn't walk in and demand change. He spends 3 days assessing the situation before he talks to anybody. Now, how easy is it for a leader to kind of have an idea of what's taking place, what the scenario is, and he has less information than what he should have, and he storms in and he just comes in and handles the situation. He flashes his sheriff badge around and says, well, we'll talk about that in a second, but he comes in and he just simply makes demands after demand. Do this, do this, do this, do this, before he even knows what needs to be done. Oftentimes a leader may believe he knows what needs to be done, but he's working from a lack of information. Nehemiah, I think, shows us a really good approach. He took 3 days without talking to anybody, and he assessed the situation during those 3 days, well, during the nights. He assessed the situation to make sure he had all the facts. Now, when I say don't be quick to demand change, maybe we could make that don't even make demands. Again, Nehemiah comes in. What kind of authority does Nehemiah wield? Quite a bit when you think about it. He was sent by the king of Persia. He was sent by the top dog in all of the regions around there. He has papers. He was given like an army, the escort that brought him out there. He has all of this at his disposal. He could have just shown his sheriff's badge and said, hey, you need to do what I tell you to do, because I'm the sheriff. There's a new sheriff in town, and I'm going to force you to do. And he could have demanded this, demanded that, demanded this of all of them, and it would have been well within his right as far as authority is concerned, but it also would have made all kinds of problems among the people. It's not what Nehemiah does. Instead, what Nehemiah does is, after assessing the situation, he gathers everyone together and he says, guys, here's my vision. Because instead of demanding that they accept his vision, he invites them to join in his vision. And that's a totally different picture. He doesn't say, well, because I'm who I am, I expect that you will automatically do this, so you have to. He says, because the vision itself is so important, I expect you to join in with it. He makes no demands. He just simply says, this is what needs to be done. Are you with me? And what you find, I forgot that I'd thrown this on there. You guys have seen this phrase, right, before? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't what? You can't make him drink. All right. And I think that's so important. This is a trite, cliched phrase. It's one of those that's so overused. There's a reason that cliched phrases become cliched phrases. It's because they're true. Metaphorically speaking, this is absolutely correct. He can come in and bring everyone to the point of water, but until they buy in that they need a drink from this, they will not do it. You have to share the vision and not force people, but lead people to join in the vision with you. And this isn't necessarily for leaders, it's absolutely for leaders, but not strictly for leaders, but with all the people. If a vision has been presented and a leader has invited you to share in with this vision, and it says, I am going to get to work, and says to all of the rest of the group, this is the vision that we have before us. I'm sharing it with you. I am inviting you to join in with this vision. If you share a clear mental picture of what could be, and it's fueled by a conviction that it should be, don't stand idle and say, wow, I wish things were better. I agree, things should be better. I really wish that they were. I'll pray about that. Well, yeah, it's the first part. But that's not the ending part. Get to work. Let us rise up and build. Understand the picture that is before us. Nehemiah, we understand, comes and he shows them a better vision. And that gets to kind of the last thing that I really want to talk about here, is when you have bought into a vision, follow the same steps that Nehemiah does. First, pray about this vision. That's the first step. That's the very first thing. If someone shows you a vision and you say, that's right, I see it, I agree, I'm on board. Your vision is my vision. Pray about that vision, that God will use you very specifically in some way, but then plan in such a way that when the opportunity comes, you are prepared for what it is that you have asked God to provide for you. And then here in Nehemiah chapter 2 and 3, get to work. Don't just be idle, but when the opportunity arises, when the moment comes to do it, get to work. Now I say all of this, and by the way, it may sound like I'm finished with Nehemiah. We're far from finished with Nehemiah. This isn't the end of the series. But I am wanting to at least, I've alluded to it, talked about it, but introduce very specifically our building project here. And this should come as no surprise to anybody. This has been talked about before. I know Mike's talked about it before. I've talked about it before. Different passages coming in. I prefer looking at Ephesians chapter 2, verses 18 through 22, where Paul writes to the Ephesians and tells them, you are no longer strangers and aliens. You are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, Christ Jesus himself being the cornerstone, in whom the whole structure, being joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him you are being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit. Normally, I forgot to do it. Normally what I would do is I would have one more slide, because in Ephesians 2, it's translated this way in so many translations. I don't like the translation household of God. It's an accurate one. Don't get me wrong. That word fits. There's nothing wrong grammatically or with the Greek or anything like that with the translation. And even the idea fits. But what is Paul's point at the end of chapter 2? Because when we think of someone being part of a household, we think of the people within the house, right? My household consists of, well, it's not, I would say these people right up here, some of these people right up here, and then some of them are dispersed elsewhere apparently. But my household consists of my wife and my kids. We're the household. He's not talking necessarily about the people within the house. There's one person within the house in Ephesians 2. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. In other places, are we part of the family of God? Yes. That's not Paul's point in Ephesians 2. That's all I'm saying. You can go to those places and we can have that conversation. Here, what he's trying to say at this moment in this section is that this is God's house, and we are the building. I would translate this, it's the same word, works both ways. Household, house, it's the same word. You can go either way. I would take hold off of it. I would put house, that we are the house of God, because we're built, a house, the structure is built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Christ Jesus being the cornerstone, and the whole structure, joined together, grows into a holy temple in the Lord. All of the discussion here is about the building structure that's laid on a foundation. Christ is the cornerstone, foundation of the apostles and prophets, and we are being built. Peter said we are living stones, is kind of the idea, that each of us is a stone that is being placed on the walls of this temple, being built up. And folks, this is a building project, and nearly 2,000 years ago, and it is not finished yet. Because as often as you have anybody who gives themselves over to Christ, anybody who is joined together with Christ, they become another stone, another living stone that is built upon those walls, and the building project continues on even today. We are still building the temple of God and the Spirit. We have a building project before us, and that is to seek out more stones to build upon these walls. We are not only stones, but we are builders as we continue to add stones even today. Folks, as we talk about Nehemiah and their building project, this is our building project. And these walls that we're building are more important than the walls around an ancient city, which walls they no longer even stand today anyway. But we are building a building that will endure forever. And this is why we're doing this, really. This is why we're focusing on Nehemiah, because the building of God, the stones being built on one another, that we are the building project and that we continue this building project. This is the vision that we need to have. A vision to get these walls built, that we look around at the world around us and we see all of the walls that are just lying in ruins, as we look out and we see all of those who have rejected Jesus, who have thrown off their relationship with God, who stand in the rubble of the wake of the fall in Genesis 3 and everything that's happened since, and we can see that there is a better way. We can have a vision of what could be, and we know that it should be, and it must be, if we are to be who we were created to be. All of this focus on evangelism has led to this, because that's what evangelism really is. It is our building project. And like those in the days of Nehemiah, may we all say, let us rise up and build. Let's pray. We thank you, our great and glorious God, that you have given to us every blessing that we have. We thank you for this church, and as we strive to bring others to a relationship with you, we ask that you would help us as a church to be evangelistic. Not just that you would give us success. Help us now to rise up and build. Again, we thank you for the blessings we have, especially the hope of eternity, being living stones in your temple. And we thank you for your Son, the chief cornerstone, who makes all of this possible. And it's through Jesus we now pray. Amen.